Your support keeps these stories alive. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. It all started with something that should have been simple: a rabbit. A cute, fuzzy, utterly harmless bunny that in any sane household would have been met with mild annoyance, maybe a shoe tap toward the door, and that's it. But in my house, this bunny turned into the spark that set off an avalanche. We'd found it nibbling at the edge of the vegetable garden in the backyard. The kids naturally wanted to keep it. My wife, on the other hand, declared it an infestation. I suggested calmly, reasonably, that we just take it to the bushes behind the property, let it hop away, and be done with it. But no, she insisted on a more permanent solution. I told her outright, "Don't do that, the kids will be upset." And she didn't listen. I should have known what would follow. My eldest, who's usually the peacemaker among her siblings, was devastated. My youngest cried so hard she hiccuped for half an hour. Then came the nickname BK, short for Bunny Killer. At first, it was just a muttered insult when they were mad at her. Then it became the go-to jab anytime she denied them ice cream or bedtime extensions. The kids are creative when they're angry, but this was persistent. I tried to help. Groundings, timeouts, even lectures about respecting their mother. But the nickname kept coming back like a bad song stuck on repeat. Every time I heard it, I knew it was digging at her, and every time she reacted, it just gave the kids more fuel. And then, because apparently this house runs on tension, she found my Reddit post. I'd written it out in a moment of frustration late at night, more to vent than anything else. I thought it was anonymous enough. I thought she'd never see it, but she did, and when she confronted me, it was like a switch flipped. She wasn't just annoyed, she was livid. We fought, not just a sharp exchange, but one of those deep, festering arguments that drags every unrelated grievance into the light. The kind where you're both digging through the past looking for ammunition. Her voice cracked from yelling. Mine went flat because when I'm angry enough, I get quiet, and she hates that. By the end, she'd given me the cold shoulder so completely that she might as well have been living in another city. For a week, she barely spoke to me unless it was absolutely necessary. Meals were silent. The TV became our third roommate. I stopped even trying to guess what mood she was in because it didn't matter, the answer was always angry. Then, one evening, out of nowhere, she thawed. She said grudgingly, almost like the words were bitter in her mouth, that maybe she should have listened to me about the bunny, that maybe taking it to the bushes would have been better. She admitted she'd only doubled down because she didn't want to be wrong. And I accepted her apology. I even apologized for the Reddit post. We had this mutual, uncomfortable truce. For a moment, it felt like things might settle. I suggested marriage counseling. She flat out refused. Said there was nothing wrong with our marriage. I didn't push because she looked almost normal again, and I was so damn tired of walking on eggshells. A couple of weeks later, my eldest came to me. She's not the type to stir drama. She's got a quiet kind of courage, the kind that waits until she's sure it's worth speaking up. But I could see the storm brewing in her eyes before she even opened her mouth. She said there was another reason she'd been mad at her mother, something she'd been scared to tell me. I told her she could say anything. My heart was already speeding up, though I didn't know why. And then she told me. Her voice shook when she said it. "Mama been bringing a man over when you're at work. She calls him her special friend." She explained in the careful, halting way kids do when they know the grown-up in front of them is about to break that her mom had bribed them to keep quiet. Candy, toys, special privileges. But over time she'd realized something about it wasn't right. She worked up the courage to tell me because, in her words, "I think you need to know, Daddy." In that moment, everything I thought was behind us, the bunny fight, the Reddit post, the cold shoulder, became background noise to a far louder alarm going off in my head. And whether I knew it or not, that was the day my marriage began to truly, irreversibly collapse. After my eldest told me about the special friend, I felt my stomach turn in on itself. I wanted to believe she'd misunderstood, that it was some harmless visit from a neighbor or an old coworker stopping by to say hello, that maybe special friend was just an innocent nickname in her young mind, but deep down I already knew better. Looking back, my wife's behavior over the last few months suddenly made far too much sense. The irritability, the sudden bursts of defensiveness over nothing, the way she seemed to pick fights just to have a reason to storm off. It wasn't just moodiness, it was strategy. A wall she was building between us brick by brick so she could live her double life without guilt eating her alive. I thought about the night I showed her my Reddit post. She didn't just get mad, she unloaded every criticism she could find. My appearance, my habits, my family, even things I'd done a decade ago, like the fact I used to smoke before our first child was born. She brought it all up rapid fire like she had an internal list she'd been saving for the right moment. Then she'd locked herself in the bedroom, crying loud enough for the neighbors to hear. It was performative, and I fell for it. Now, with my daughter's words echoing in my mind, the pieces started to fit in ways I didn't like. I told myself to stay calm. The easiest thing in the world right then would have been to confront her, demand answers, make her trip over her own lies. But I knew if I came at her without proof, she'd just deny it and dig in deeper. Worse, she'd know I was watching her and she'd get more careful. No, if there was a truth to uncover, I'd need evidence, cold, undeniable evidence. The next day at work, I ordered 3 hidden cameras, small enough to blend into the house with live feeds I could monitor from my phone or computer. I had them shipped to my workplace so she'd never see the package. I also started quietly reading up on my state's privacy and recording laws just in case. I wasn't going to give her any legal loophole to wriggle out of later. When the cameras arrived, I felt like I was crossing a line, but I also felt like I didn't have a choice. That night, she went out for a girls' night, and I stayed home with the kids. After they went to bed, I worked quickly. One in the living room, one in the hallway near the bedrooms, and one in our bedroom. I disguised them so well that even I had to look twice to remember where they were. It was strange, walking through my own house, setting up surveillance like I was an intruder. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was an outsider in my own marriage. This wasn't a home anymore, it was a stage where I was the fool in the background and she was acting out a play I didn't know the script to. The first couple of days, nothing. I started to wonder if maybe I'd gone too far. Then on the third day I saw him. He walked right through my front door like he belonged there, younger than her by a good 10 years. Clean-shaven, dressed sharp but casual, the kind of guy who probably thinks a leather jacket and a smirk are personality traits. My wife greeted him like a teenager seeing her crush at the locker. No hesitation, no awkwardness, just pure, unfiltered comfort. I froze at my desk, watching from my work laptop. It felt surreal, like I was watching some stranger's life unravel instead of my own. They sat on the couch talking close. She laughed in a way she hadn't laughed with me in years. And the way they touched each other, little brushes of the hand, fingers on the knee, it was deliberate, intimate. Not the kind of contact you have with someone you're just friends with. I recognized him after a few minutes. He was a former coworker of hers, one she used to talk about often back when she still worked. I remembered him from company events. Back then, I thought nothing of how much they joked around. She left that job years ago to be a stay-at-home mom, but apparently she'd kept this connection. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face in my house, his hands on her, her smile aimed at him like it used to be aimed at me. The next day, I called my sister. She's always been my confidant, the one person I can count on to tell me the truth without sugarcoating it. I told her everything, even sent her a few stills from the camera footage. There was a long pause on the other end of the line before she said, "I've suspected something for a while." Then she dropped her own bombshell. Months ago, she'd seen my wife at a local bar getting far too close with a man she didn't recognize at the time. They never kissed, but there was touching, lingering, enough for my sister to take note but not enough for her to feel certain. She hadn't told me because she didn't want to start a fire without proof. Now, with the camera footage, she was sure. That conversation lit another fuse in me. Cameras weren't enough. I needed to know where they went, what they did when they weren't in my house. So I ordered a GPS tracker, a small one, easy to hide. 2 days later, when my wife was out running errands, I tucked it into the trunk of her car. I didn't have to wait long for results. The first girls' night after that, my sister and her husband drove out to follow the signal. Instead of heading to her usual bar, my wife drove 20 miles out to a completely different place. She parked, and there he was, the same man from my living room, waiting for her. My sister's voice cracked when she called me. "He kept rubbing her stomach," she said. My brain stalled, rubbing her stomach, that was strange. And then, like a cold blade between the ribs, the thought hit me, she might be pregnant. By him. When my sister told me she saw him rubbing her stomach, the world seemed to go silent for a second. It was one of those moments where the air feels too heavy to breathe and your thoughts slam to a stop like a train hitting the brakes. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was just some weird, overly intimate gesture between them. Maybe he was joking about her weight. No, that wasn't right. She'd have killed him for that. The way my sister described it, it wasn't teasing. It was soft, possessive, the kind of touch that says this is ours. I remembered back when she was pregnant with our first child. The way I used to rest my hand on her belly, feeling the faintest kicks, trying to talk to our baby through her skin, it was an instinct, a connection, and I knew instantly that man wasn't just touching her, he was claiming her. The drive home from work that day felt like moving through molasses. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached. I couldn't stop imagining what my sister had seen, replaying it over and over. My wife's smile, his hand, that secret they shared, one that had nothing to do with me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I felt hollow, empty in a way I'd never experienced before. Because suspicion is one thing, you can shove it to the back of your mind and pretend it doesn't exist. But once you have imagery attached to it, suspicion turns into certainty. That night, she was in an oddly good mood. She floated around the kitchen humming softly, her hair tied back, a faint flush on her cheeks, and it wasn't for me. It was for whatever was going on inside her head, or maybe inside her womb. I forced myself to act normal, asked about her day, listened to her half-hearted story about a long lunch with the girls. She spoke quickly, like she wanted to get the conversation over with. Then she excused herself early, saying she was tired. I sat there at the table long after she went to bed, staring at the untouched plate in front of me. My appetite was gone. Instead, my mind spun in tight, angry circles. If she was pregnant, the timing didn't add up for it to be mine. We hadn't been intimate in months, not for lack of trying on my part either. She'd pushed me away every time, too tired, not in the mood, I feel bloated. Excuses that felt more like roadblocks, and now I knew why. I didn't drink that night. God, I wanted to, but my sister's voice from earlier in the week echoed in my head. Don't do anything stupid, stay sharp. She was right, I needed my wits. The next few days, I paid closer attention than ever, not just to her movements but to her moods. And I noticed it, the same hormonal swings I remembered from both of her pregnancies with our kids. Irritability, then giddy bursts of energy, random crying, a sudden craving for salty snacks at night. It wasn't just my imagination, it was happening again, but the life growing inside her wasn't mine. That realization hit me harder than anything else in my marriage, worse than the thought of her cheating, worse than the lies, because it meant she hadn't just betrayed me, she'd taken something sacred we once shared and handed it to another man. I knew I needed more than video footage of them together. I needed them talking about it, admitting it. That was the only way to make sure there was no way for her to twist the narrative later. So I planned my move. I told her I had a work trip coming up, a few days away in another city. She didn't even pretend to be disappointed. In fact, she seemed almost giddy about it. That alone was proof enough for me. She thought she'd just been given a free pass to play house with her special friend. Behind the scenes, I arranged for my sister and brother-in-law to take the kids for a few days. They love visiting their aunt and uncle, so it wasn't suspicious. This way, there'd be no interruptions. The day I left for my trip, I checked into a cheap motel 2 towns over. It was close enough for me to be back in 10 minutes if needed, but far enough that she'd think I was gone. From the motel room, I had live access to every camera feed in the house. My laptop sat open on the bed, the charger already plugged in. I had snacks, a six-pack, and a notebook ready to jot down timestamps. Sure enough, only a few hours after I left, she made the call. I watched her on the living room camera, packing with her phone pressed to her ear, smiling in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. She told him the coast was clear. No kids, no husband, he could come over. And he did. They didn't waste time. As soon as he stepped inside, she kissed him, deep, lingering. They laughed, holding each other like two people in the honeymoon phase. My stomach churned as I typed the timestamp into my notebook. Then they started talking about the baby, about their baby. He asked her what they'd do before her belly started to show. She brushed it off with a casual wave. "We've got months," she said. And then, casually, like she was talking about the weather, she admitted this wasn't even her first affair. She'd cheated on me years ago when she was 29. I sat there in that motel room, staring at the screen, realizing I'd been living with a stranger for nearly 2 decades. When he asked what would happen with the kids, she didn't hesitate. "He can have them." She said it like they were furniture she didn't want to move. That was the exact moment my love for her died. That night in the motel, I sat on the bed with the laptop screen still glowing in the dark, watching them joke about me like I was some pathetic background character in their love story. They talked about their baby like it was the greatest secret in the world. They even laughed about how easy it would be to move on without me. She said she was tired of being around a boring man who made her feel old, and if it wasn't for my financial stability, she'd have been gone long ago. It's strange how pain can burn so hot that it stops feeling like pain. It turns into this cold, surgical clarity. I wasn't crying, I wasn't shaking, I was steady, focused. Because in that moment, something inside me locked into place. I was going to destroy her in every way the law would allow. I closed the laptop, stared at the motel ceiling for a long while, then grabbed my phone. The first number I dialed was my sister. She answered groggy, her voice low so she wouldn't wake the kids in the guest room. I told her what I'd seen and heard, every ugly detail. She didn't try to comfort me, she knows I hate pity. Instead, she said, then you make sure she never gets the chance to hurt you or the kids again. That was all the push I needed. The next morning, I called a well-known law firm in town and asked for the meanest divorce lawyer they had. When I met him later that afternoon, he seemed cautious at first, probably expecting a messy he said she said. But when I told him I lived in an at-fault state, had hidden camera footage, audio of her admitting to the affair, and proof she was pregnant by another man, his eyebrows shot up. I slid my laptop across the desk, played a few choice clips, and watched a slow, devilish grin spread across his face. We shook hands like two men about to start a hunt. He promised he'd start drafting immediately. Back at home, I became meticulous. Every conversation, every move, every visit from her special friend was documented, time-stamped, and backed up to multiple drives. I started keeping my important documents, birth certificates, mortgage papers, bank statements, locked in my office. I transferred my personal savings into an account in my name only. I quietly cut her off from anything she could drain in a panic. A few weeks later, it was time. My lawyer had the papers ready. We agreed it would be best to serve her when the kids were at school and I was home to witness it. That morning, I worked from my home office, pretending it was a normal day. Then the sheriff's car pulled up. I didn't have to watch the cameras to know when she got the envelope, but I did anyway, couldn't resist seeing the shock on her face when she realized the game was over. She stormed into my office, voice sharp and shaking, accusing me of betrayal like I was the one who'd been sneaking around. I just sat there, calm as stone, and told her I made up my mind. She wasn't welcome in my house anymore. That's when she threatened me, said she'd tell people I abused her, get me fired, ruin my life. I told her to go right ahead because I had enough footage to crush any lie she came up with. I watched her eyes widen when I mentioned the pregnancy, and for the first time she didn't have a quick retort. She locked herself in the bedroom again, but I could see her on the feed, fake crying into the phone as she called the police, smiling between her rehearsed sobs. When the officers arrived, she ran out like she was escaping a monster. They came in hot, ready to react, until I invited them to sit down and watch what really happened. I showed them her threats, her staged call, every second from multiple angles. When it was over, she was the one in handcuffs, still insisting she was the victim even as they let her out. The next morning, I shut down every credit card in my name, froze the joint account, and put her suitcase in her car with the keys on the seat. She could bail herself out with her own money, she'd saved enough back when she worked. Her parents came by that afternoon, ready to defend her, but when I showed them the footage, I watched their faces collapse. They called her on speaker in front of me, told her they knew the truth, and disowned her right there. I'll never forget her mother's voice, shaking with both fury and grief, saying, "We didn't raise you to be this." By the time she came back with her lover to collect the rest of her things, I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. She barely looked at me, and the kids didn't get so much as a hug. She took down our wedding photos, dropped them on the floor to shatter, and left without a word. And I stood there in the quiet house, knowing the war wasn't over yet, but I was already winning. The day I stepped into the courthouse for the first hearing, it didn't feel like I was walking into a legal proceeding. It felt like I was walking into a battlefield I'd been preparing for my entire life without realizing it. The difference was that in this war, my weapons weren't fists or guns, they were timestamps, video files, and the cold, unshakable truth. My lawyer and I had spent weeks assembling a case so tight you could have locked a bank vault with it. Every minute of footage was organized, labeled, and backed up in 3 different places. Copies sat with my lawyer, one was stored in a safety deposit box, and one was in my personal possession. We didn't just want to win, we wanted to make it impossible for her to even think about appealing. When she walked in, visibly pregnant now, she was wearing this dress that almost screamed sympathetic mother-to-be. Her hair was perfect, her makeup subtle, and she clutched a small stack of papers like she was going to give the performance of her life. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. She knew I had proof, she just didn't know how much. AP wasn't there. I didn't know if that was by choice or because he didn't want to be dragged into legal proceedings, but I didn't care. This was between me, her, and the judge. The first thing she tried was the soft story, painting herself as the overwhelmed wife who made a mistake because she felt neglected. My lawyer didn't even blink, just stood, handed over a stack of labeled USB drives, and asked for the court's permission to play some clips. The judge agreed. The room went quiet except for the sound of my wife's own voice filling the speakers. Her laughing with AP about their baby. Her saying she was sick of being around me, calling me boring, admitting she'd cheated before, telling AP I could have the kids because she didn't want to deal with them. The judge's expression stayed neutral, but I saw the way his eyes narrowed. Then came the footage from the day she tried to frame me, her calling the police, smiling between fake sobs, telling them I'd hurt her, followed by the video of her admitting to AP that she might make something up to ruin my life. I saw my lawyer glance sideways at her just to watch the color drain from her face. When her turn came to respond, she stammered, tried to claim the recordings were illegal. The judge cut her off, reminded her that in our state I had every right to record in my own home. She tried pivoting to how she was the primary caregiver for the kids, but we had timestamps and records showing she barely interacted with them in months, that she'd left them with others so she could spend time with AP. It got uglier from there. She demanded half of my savings, the house, my car, and spousal support. She wanted me to buy her out of her supposed half of the home, even though her name wasn't on the mortgage and she'd never made a single payment toward it. My lawyer calmly dismantled each demand one by one, citing law, precedent, and most importantly, her own recorded words. The judge didn't take long to deliberate. He ruled that she was the at-fault party. She got no custody, no claim to the house, only her personal belongings, what could be considered a minimal financial settlement under the circumstances, and the car I'd already given her. That was it. When the gavel came down, it was like a weight I'd been carrying for years just fell off me in one clean drop. She didn't look at me when we left the courtroom. She just gathered her things, her belly obvious now, and walked out with her lawyer trailing behind her like a beaten dog. Word spread quickly after that. My sister, who had been my anchor through all of this, made sure the truth reached every mutual friend we had. The sympathy she might have fished for dried up instantly. People she'd known for decades cut her off cold. I didn't have to lift a finger. Her own actions had become her social obituary. Within a month of the divorce being finalized, she and AP were gone. No goodbye to the kids. No attempt to fight for visitation. Just vanished. I heard from a distant acquaintance that AP hadn't been fired but was transferred out of state and she went with him. I never asked where. I didn't want to know. For all I cared, they could have moved to the ends of the earth. What mattered was this: the house was mine, the kids were with me, and I was free. And as I drove home from that final hearing, the air felt cleaner than it had in years. The day after the divorce was finalized, I woke up in a house that felt foreign, not because anything had changed physically, her stuff had been gone for weeks, but because the tension, that constant static in the air, had evaporated. The silence was different now. It wasn't loaded, it wasn't sharp, it was just silence. The kids were still at my sister for the weekend so I could decompress, as she put it. I remember walking through each room like I was seeing it for the first time in years. The living room no longer felt like a stage for lies. The kitchen wasn't a cold meeting point where polite sentences hid resentment. Even the bedroom, God, that bedroom felt like it had been reclaimed from enemy territory. I stripped the bed, threw the old sheets in a trash bag, and dumped them straight in the outside bin. Bought a new set that afternoon. It was symbolic, but it mattered. I also started small but important rituals. Coffee by the window in the morning, no rush. Music playing in the background while I worked from home. Opening windows just to let in the smell of the trees outside. All things that had somehow disappeared over the years, as if I'd been unconsciously adjusting myself to her moods and presence without realizing it. When the kids came back, I was nervous. I didn't know how much they understood or how much they asked. The first night, my eldest asked the big question, "Why isn't Mama coming back?" I told her the truth in a way she could handle. Mama had made choices that hurt our family, and it was better for everyone if she lived somewhere else now. She just nodded. My youngest cried, but kids are resilient. They adapt faster than adults do. Slowly, I began to rebuild not just my life but our sense of home. I moved furniture around, painted the hallway a lighter color. I let the kids help choose decorations for their rooms. We planted a small garden in the backyard together. I wanted them to see that our life wasn't on pause just because someone had chosen to walk out. But there were harder days too. Nights when I'd sit at my desk after they went to bed and scroll through old photos without meaning to. Family trips, birthdays, her smile back when I thought it was real. That was the worst part, not the loss of her, but the loss of the version of her I thought existed. It felt like grieving a person who had died, except I'd found out they were never who I thought they were to begin with. I kept up with my lawyer for a while, tying off loose ends, things like changing the deed on the house, updating my will, adjusting my life insurance beneficiaries. These were the cold, administrative parts of moving on, the ones people don't think about but that matter if you've been burned once and don't plan on being burned again. My sister and brother-in-law were constant. They'd drop by unannounced just to check in. My in-laws, well, I still call them my in-laws because they still saw the kids regularly, became part of our routine. Sunday dinners at their place became a thing. We didn't talk about her unless the kids brought her up, and even then we kept it light. It wasn't about rewriting history. It was about not letting her shadow linger over us any longer than it had to. And as the weeks turned into months, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't checking my phone expecting bad news. I wasn't bracing myself for an argument the moment I walked through the door. I was living. It was slow and it was messy, and there were moments I'd feel that old bitterness creep back in. But every time I heard the kids laughing in the backyard or saw them run to me when I picked them up from school, it reminded me exactly why I fought so hard. Freedom didn't come with fireworks or a grand epiphany. It came in quiet mornings, in dinners without tension, in the absence of fear. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe. It's strange the way freedom sneaks up on you. At first I thought I'd just use it to catch my breath, recover from the chaos, focus on the kids, keep my head down. But as the weeks turned into months, I started noticing something I hadn't felt in years: curiosity about my own life, about who I was outside of being a husband, a father, and a man constantly on alert for the next fight. The first real shift happened one Saturday morning. The kids were at my in-laws for the weekend, and I woke up without an alarm, sunlight spilling into the room. Normally, I'd roll over, grab my phone, and scroll for an hour, trying to distract myself from the gnawing feeling in my chest. But this time I just got up, made coffee, sat outside on the porch in complete silence, letting the steam curl into the cool air. No one asking where something was. No one stomping around the kitchen, slamming cabinets to make a point. Just me and the morning. I started doing things I'd forgotten I even liked. I dusted off my guitar, which had been sitting untouched in the corner of my office for years, its strings loose and lifeless. I restrung it, tuned it, and realized my fingers still remembered where to go. I took the kids hiking on Sundays, exploring trails I'd driven past 100 times but never had the right weekend to try. My sister pushed me to go further. She signed me up for a cooking class without asking. "You need to eat something besides takeout and grilled cheese," she'd said. At first, I hated the idea of standing in a room full of strangers, pretending to care about sautéing techniques. But halfway through the first lesson, I found myself laughing with the guy next to me as we both botched the same sauce recipe. I took leftovers home to the kids, and they devoured them like I'd brought back treasure. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There were days when I'd catch myself falling into old patterns, double-checking where the kids were in the house, bracing for criticism that never came. Some nights, lying in bed, I'd feel the ghost of her presence, the memory of how her side of the bed used to dip when she rolled over. And then I'd remember the truth, the footage, the words, the betrayals, and any trace of longing evaporated. The hardest moments were the unexpected ones. Like the day a mutual friend, one who still didn't know the full story, sent me a text saying she'd seen my ex in another city, visibly pregnant, walking into a cafe with AP. She said they looked happy. I stared at the message for a long time, wondering if I should care, and I realized I didn't. Not really. Happy or miserable, together or apart, she was out of my life. That was enough. I also started to notice how much lighter the kids seemed. My eldest stopped flinching when voices got raised, because in our home now they rarely did. My youngest began sleeping through the night again. We had movie nights without someone sighing through half the film. We could spill popcorn on the carpet without it turning into a lecture about respect for the house. It hit me one evening, watching them curled up on the couch, that I wasn't just building a new life for myself, I was building it for them too. They were learning that home could be peaceful, that love didn't have to be conditional. By the end of that first year, I'd stopped measuring time in before and after the divorce. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living on my own terms, making choices because I wanted to, not because I was trying to avoid conflict. And for the first time in a long, long time, I started to believe I could actually be happy again. It happened on a Thursday evening, the kind of night where nothing feels out of place. The kids were in their rooms doing homework, dinner was simmering on the stove, and I was halfway through answering a work email when I heard it: 3 quick knocks on the front door. Not the casual knock of a neighbor or the sharp rap of a delivery driver, but deliberate, measured, like the person on the other side was bracing for my reaction. I knew before I even opened it. She stood there in the doorway, belly full and obvious now, wearing a cardigan over a floral dress like she'd chosen the outfit specifically to soften herself. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her, not in years, but in wear. AP wasn't with her. Her hands were clasped low, right over the curve of her stomach. "Can we talk?" she asked. I almost laughed. Months of silence, no interest in the kids, no word about the divorce, and now, when she's weeks away from having another man's baby, she wanted to talk. But I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me. The kids didn't need to hear this. She launched into it without much preamble, said she'd been thinking about making things right between us, that she'd agree to a clean settlement, split assets, no further legal fights if I would be reasonable about custody in the house. The words were polite, but the tone was familiar. It was the same manipulative cadence she used when she wanted something back when we were married: offer a little, expect a lot, pretend it's compromise. I told her no, flat, no elaboration, no bargaining. I wasn't interested in renegotiating the outcome she'd already earned. She tried to push, shifting the subject to the kids, how she wanted to reconnect with them, how it wasn't fair to keep them from her. I reminded her she'd walked away from them. Her own words, recorded and played in court, proved she'd never intended to be a mother to them again. That's when the mask slipped. The softness in her voice cracked, replaced by the same venom I'd heard in our last months together. She accused me of turning them against her, of poisoning them with my bitterness. She said AP was done with the drama and that she didn't need this stress while pregnant. And there it was, the real reason she'd shown up. AP wasn't giving her what she wanted anymore, and she was circling back to the man she thought would still be holding the safety net. I told her something I'd been holding onto since the day she left. You made your choices, you burned every bridge, and the door you're standing at, it's closed for good. She just stood there, jaw tight, eyes flicking between mine and the closed door behind me. I could see the calculation in her head, whether there was anything left to say, any angle left to play. Finally, she muttered something under her breath, turned, and walked down the steps. I watched her go. No part of me wanted to call her back. When I came back inside, my eldest was standing just inside the hallway, holding her math book. She didn't ask who was at the door. She didn't have to. I just nodded toward the kitchen and said, "Dinner's ready." She smiled, a small, genuine smile, and went to set the table. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the couch in the quiet house, thinking about how easy it would have been once upon a time to let her back in. Out of habit, out of guilt, out of some misguided belief that people change when they've already shown you exactly who they are. But not anymore. That knock at the door was the past testing my resolve, and I'd passed. After that knock at the door, something shifted inside me. It was like the last loose thread had finally been cut. She was gone, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Whatever part of me had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to find some way back into our lives, finally stopped waiting. Life settled into a rhythm that felt honest. The house wasn't haunted anymore. The air didn't feel heavy. Mornings became predictable in the best way: alarm, coffee, breakfast with the kids, dropping them at school. We'd talk about their homework or the weekend plans on the drive, laugh about silly things we'd seen online. The quiet that followed when I came home wasn't loneliness anymore, it was peace. Money stopped disappearing from our accounts. The fridge stopped mysteriously emptying of certain snacks, only to be replaced with things no one but her liked. The thermostat stayed at a comfortable setting instead of swinging from one extreme to the other depending on her mood. These sound like little things, but they were constant reminders that this house was finally ours, mine and the kids', not a war zone with shifting battle lines. I poured myself into being present for them. School events, soccer practice, science fairs, I was there every time. I took them camping for the first time, something I'd always wanted to do but had been shot down on before because it's too much work or I don't like bugs. We roasted marshmallows, told ghost stories, and fell asleep in a tent to the sound of crickets. I'll never forget waking up to see them both still asleep, curled up in their sleeping bags, looking peaceful in a way they hadn't in years. We made traditions of our own. Friday pizza nights, Saturday morning pancake breakfasts, movie marathons with homemade popcorn. I let them help with the cooking, even when it meant the kitchen was a disaster afterward. I didn't care, it was ours to clean up together. Every now and then someone would mention her in passing. A teacher asking if mom would be coming to the parent conference, a neighbor wondering if she still lived in the area. I'd keep my answers short: "No, it's just me now." People usually didn't press further, but if they did, I told the truth: she'd chosen to leave and I was raising the kids on my own. There was no shame in it for me. The shame belonged to her and I wasn't carrying it anymore. Months rolled into a year and that old sense of dread, the one that made me constantly look over my shoulder, faded until I barely remembered what it felt like. The kids laughed louder, I slept deeper. Even my sister commented one day, "You look 10 years younger." The past didn't vanish entirely. Sometimes I'd catch a whiff of a certain perfume in a store or see someone with the same hair color from behind and my stomach would twist for just a second. But the twist didn't linger, it was just a passing shadow. I realized I'd reached the true new normal when I could think about her without feeling anything, no anger, no hurt, no longing, just nothing. She was a closed chapter and my story had moved on without her. And in that quiet, steady life, I found something I hadn't expected, not just survival but real contentment. Not excitement, not fireworks, but the kind of grounded, unshakable peace you can build a future on. It's been long enough now that I can look back on everything without feeling like I'm standing in the middle of it. The storm has passed, the wreckage has been cleared, and what's left is something I never thought I'd have again: stability. Not the fake kind that hides cracks under a fresh coat of paint, but the real kind that comes from knowing the ground under your feet isn't going to give way. When I think about the man I was before all this, I almost don't recognize him. He was a husband who excused small betrayals because he thought love was supposed to be unconditional. A father who tried to keep the peace at all costs, even when the cost was his own dignity. A man who ignored his instincts until the truth had no choice but to punch him in the face. I can't be angry at that man, he didn't know better, but I'm glad he's gone. I see the difference most clearly in my kids. They carry themselves differently now. My eldest doesn't have that guarded look in her eyes anymore, the one that said she was waiting for the next argument to break out. My youngest laughs from his belly now, the kind of laugh that fills a room. They trust our home, they trust me, and they know they're safe here. There are still occasional reminders of her. A mutual acquaintance will mention hearing from her, or the kids will find an old photo in a box and ask about it. I answer honestly, but I don't dwell. I don't need to. She made her choices and the consequences are hers to carry, not mine. Sometimes I wonder if she ever regrets it. If she sits somewhere holding that child she wanted so badly and thinks about the family she traded away. I'll never know, and I don't need to. Her absence has been the greatest gift she's ever given me, whether she meant it or not. The truth is, I didn't just survive her betrayal, I rebuilt from it. I came out of it sharper, calmer, and more certain about what I will and will not allow in my life. I learned that loyalty is worthless when it's one-sided, that trust must be guarded, and that the people who truly love you will never force you to question it. If you told me in those first few days after finding out that I'd one day be grateful it happened, I'd have laughed in your face. But I'm grateful for the lesson, even if it was brutal. I'm grateful for the clarity, for the peace, for the bond I have with my kids now. And I'm grateful that I know without a shred of doubt that I'll never let anyone put me back in that place again. When I close my eyes at night now, I don't replay arguments or plot my next move in a silent war. I sleep deeply, and when I wake up to a life that is mine, truly mine. That to me is victory.